Thank you, President Sung, for your kind words, and appreciate also the organization that's putting on Korean history and culture webinar. This is like such an amazing place to learn about Korean history as well as Korean American history, something that I didn't have the chance to learn growing up when I was in K through 12. I thought I'd go ahead and begin by showing this 2-minute video clip from NBC News on the first Korean American ethnic studies class in the United States of America. And today's presentation that I'm going to share is mainly from the perspective of a teacher or teacher educator for K-12 education. So I'll be mainly thinking about like, how can we apply a lot of the things that we've talked about and learned into the classroom. But let me go ahead and begin with this little video clip.
As we honor Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, we focus on some students in Orange County who are being offered a new course in the fall.
That's right. The Anaheim Union High School District is offering Korean American Studies virtually. NBC4's Ted Chen has those details.
Maybe you've listened to K-pop, but have you ever heard of Young-Ok Kim? He's the first Asian commander of a U.S. Army battalion. They'll both be part of a new course offered by the Anaheim Union High School District on Korean American Studies. It's believed to be the first ever in the U.S.
It's a first of a kind.
Dr. Jeff Kim says he came up with the idea for the course as he saw the increasing number of anti-Asian hate incidents. He says he wanted to help students better understand who they are and where they come from.
If I were to ask a child, what is your parent's story? What is your parents' parents' story? Oftentimes they don't know their parents' story.
Students like Audrey Lee, Jaden Han, and Daniel Han told us they've heard bits and pieces from their immigrant parents and grandparents, but they say much of Korean American history has been a mystery. The class, they believe, will be an eye-opener.
It's a great opportunity.
It's not me just learning about Korean history, it's me learning about who I am as a Korean American.
The most important thing to me was that it allows me to build myself an identity and a character.
Kim says the course will cover the immigration of Korean Americans, their settlement in the U.S., and their journey through historic events like the L.A. riots. He says he hopes the course will benefit students from all backgrounds.
When they hear these stories, it will give them a strength. It will give them a feeling of resilience.
I had no idea it would take this long for the first course to be developed. So I can't even put into words how excited I am, and that my son gets to benefit.
We have such a unique past, and it's just something that that I can be proud of.
In the end, it'll help me to just really empathize and really look at the world in a new light.
Ted Chen, NBC4 News.
Now, President Sung has asked me to share about this Korean American Studies course, but I want to for us to keep in mind that before I created the Korean American Studies course, sometimes I was just teaching one module or two modules. So I'm going to share all those different pieces that we can incorporate today, whether it's a Korean American Studies class or an Asian American Studies or an ethnic studies or an English class or a history class. We could start implementing those lessons now. And of course, what I'm going to be sharing about today is how this Korean American Studies course has come about. Now, when folks ask about Korean American Studies or ethnic studies classes in general, they sometimes ask, oh, what is this course about? And if you leave with anything, I would like you to leave with these 4 words. The 4 words are know, tell, listen, and do. So in the public chat, if you could even begin typing a response to one of these questions, why do you think it's important for students to know their story? So, or why do you think it's important for students to tell their story? Why do you think it's important for others to listen to their story with empathy and respect? And why do you think it's important to do something good with your story? So go ahead, and you don't have to answer all the questions, but choose one that resonates with you and go ahead and begin typing a response in the public chat. And then when I say go, waterfall, we're gonna all push enter and we'll see a couple of responses. But I can see Amir already is providing a great one to create understanding. It's wonderful. Thank you, Amir. So why is it important to know your story, tell your story, listen to one another's story with empathy and respect, and do something good with your story? Wow, Kyle. Kyle, can you unmute yourself and share your thoughts on no history, no self, but K-N-O-W history no self. Can you share out on what that means?
Sure. I mean, in terms of no history, if you don't know your background, where you come from, those are all substantial parts of who you are. So if you don't know where you come from, how is it that you can conceive of who you are? So by looking at your history, your personal, collective, ancestral, and historical history, you then start to have a more broader picture of who you are, of course, of where you've been and also where you're going.
What do you think, Kyle?
I'm also biased.
What do you think, Kyle? Do you think that young people are asking the question, who am I?
I think young people are being asked the question, who am I, especially when they're applying to colleges. And sometimes it's the first time that when they're applying to colleges is actually for the first time. Fortunately for me, in 7th grade, I was required in my English class to write an autobiography. So I was actually compelled to ask my grandparents where I came and where I'm from. But I think students are being asked to identify who it is that they are, but it's not necessarily situated within the context of their social, political, and ethnic identities. And so it's not as deep of, let's say, a self-assessment of themselves. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Kyle. Absolutely. Wonderful chat. If you haven't had a chance to respond, go ahead and push enter at this time. And yeah, knowing, I think young people are asking the question, who am I? They're going to be asked this question later on in life. I'm glad also you mentioned college applications and things like that. Sometimes they ask these questions in silos, but how wonderful would it be if, like your teacher, Kyle, in 7th grade, middle school, or even elementary or high school, students had a chance to know their own story, to be able to tell it to others. Sometimes when we voice our story to others, when we use our voice to tell our story, that creates a sense of agency, this feeling like I can do something about things that I care about when we start to voice our thoughts and opinions. How about others listening to our stories with empathy and respect? How about doing something with our stories? Yeah, Lisa, we talked about building empathy for others. Yeah, could that be valuable for students today to develop empathy today in the present, whether they're middle and high school? But we know that's also great for the future, right? When it comes to like colleges, it'd be helpful for them to have empathy. Some people call this leadership or emotional quotient. A lot of researchers say today that when it comes to like leadership positions, executive positions in the field, yes, scholastic ability, academic ability, that has value, IQ, right? But what's even more valuable is EQ. So this ability to, first of all, tell your story and also listen to one another's story is a way to build leadership, to build empathy. And when we think about our country, I think that's the kind of country we want to be, right? The kind of country that's able to respectfully share civilly and also listen to one another. Yeah. All right. I got from Osan, Korea, our story tells us who we are. Identity, listen to another's stories. Who we strive to be. Yeah, sometimes in the telling of our story, it gives us direction, helps us to feel value. Oh, my story matters, right? Helps us sympathize with others, build connections, build relationships. Is this something that we could be developing in our schools? So for those of us who are in K-12, would this be valuable? But I'll tell you, teaching at the university as well, this is also valuable in college as well. So one of my first activities, I'm going to share it in a little bit. But anyways, in our district, in Anaheim Union High School District, and I see some other folks in Anaheim near Disneyland in Anaheim Elementary. So big shout out to Sung and Vicky from Anaheim Elementary, our feeder into Anaheim Union High School District. But we have a first best instruction, which says to know students by name, need, assets, and stories, and also their passion. But what if a student doesn't know their own story? I think that's sometimes the case for many Asian Americans, Korean Americans. I once had a Korean American student come into my class when I was teaching, or a little bit after I was teaching, and that student said to me, "I'm so proud that you're a teacher." And then I was looking at that student, and I was like, "That student's not in my class," but said that to me, right? But then I was like, went home and I thought about it. I thought about, you know what? I never had a teacher that looked like me in all my K through 12 education growing up in California. I didn't know my own story. I never had a chance to learn about even one Korean American that made a difference for the United States. I didn't know my own history because even my own parents didn't know a lot about Korean American history. In fact, because things can be so busy at times, I didn't even know that much about my parents' story as well, and their story of resilience. Now, they have a great story of resilience, but I didn't know. And so for a lot of students, Asian American students, oftentimes if I asked you to ask them to share their parents' story, they wouldn't know their parents' story because of the language barrier. Sometimes life is busy. We heard Carol Park talked about how it took 5 years to hear her mom's story. But hearing those stories helps us to develop and answer that question, who am I? And when we understand these stories, sometimes they're very powerful stories of resilience that can help us today and then also help us tomorrow. Now, I thought I'd share a little bit about how this Korean American Studies course came about. Once again, my main focus is not Korean American Studies. My main focus is instructional leadership, the 5 C's: communication, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, civic leadership. That has been my more area of greater focus. But in 2020, as Carol Park mentioned, we saw 2 pandemics. First of all, the pandemic of COVID-19 and the resurgence of anti-Asian racism. In 2020, we saw that 1,800% increase in anti-Asian hate. And I was kind of used to kind of hearing slurs and things like that growing up, and even as I got older. But when I saw the elderly getting beaten, like really badly, some even dying, that really upset me. That really did not make me feel good. And then when I heard about the 6 women in Atlanta, the Asian American women who were working in the spas were targeted and killed, then I knew that I could not be silent on this topic anymore. There's something that I needed to do. Now, during that time of 2020, we saw many people responding out of fear and anger. But I asked myself, Jeff, how can you respond out of love and wisdom? What would be a loving response to this painful experience that the community is seeing? What would be a wise response? And so I thought about the Korean American Studies class. So when we see that surge in anti-Asian racism, they talked about the Exclusion Acts beginning in, or even before, the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, the first act that excluded a group from coming to the United States by race. But even before that was the 1975 Page Act, which Carol Park alluded to, which actually excluded most Chinese women as well from migrating to the United States. Once again, immigration was happening, migration was happening all over the globe, but in 1882, the Chinese were excluded. Then in 1907, it was the Japanese Americans. Then 1924, pretty much all Asian Americans, and which is why we're seeing a greater amount of migration from Asia today, because a lot of that is happening post 1965 Immigration Act as a result of many of the civil rights acts and movements that happened during that time period. But prior to that, there was not significant, although I guess there was significant, but not in terms of numbers, Korean American immigration. So we knew that even from the very beginning, lots of stereotypes, including this idea of a persistent foreigner. These people can never really become Americans or were excluded from this country. Yellow peril. I mean, during World War II, we were at war with more than just Japan, but who were incarcerated? It was the Japanese Americans. Even children were incarcerated. This idea of there's something dangerous about those people. And even today, right, COVID-19, there's something dangerous about those people. But then there was that question, oh, how many of you can relate to Korea? For me, I'm a 2nd generation Korean American, born in the United States. My children are 3rd generation Korean American. My eldest 3 just went to Korea for the first time ever. So not a lot of attachment necessarily to Korea. We're Americans, Korean Americans. So that's why it's so important to know about various Korean American stories. And I encourage everyone to begin with your curiosity. If you look at the Korean American Model Ethnic Studies curriculum, there's a number of different folks that we could look at. We heard Dr. Chang talked about Dosan An Chang-ho. We heard Carol Park talk a little bit about Colonel Young Kim, and Dr. Sammy Lee is another one. So despite segregation by race, he was actually the first person to win back-to-back gold medals in Olympic platform diving for the United States. Now, this is really interesting because it was during the time of segregation where people of color, which also included Korean Americans, could not use the swimming pool. So on most days. So it was only one day where he could practice using swimming and diving. So this is just a remarkable, once again, story of resilience. And it's once again not about just the diving, but also his story of contribution to this country. There's so many. And so this course is broken up into 5 different pieces. The first part is helping students to know and tell their story. And then this could be done in any class. So I'm going to incorporate much of this into an opportunity for my students to community build, whether they're taking my Korean American Studies class or not. The second part will be Korean Americans, a concise history children's book. So using the book, A Concise History, creating a children's book or some type of presentation based on that book. Part 3 will be looking at a variety of Korean American stories of resilience. Part 4 will be a virtual Korean American museum. And part 5 will be a civic action component. So let's go ahead and begin with part 1 here. In part 1, it's broken up into 3 modules: the My Story assignment, photo voice, and ethnography. So let me begin by sharing the My Story assignment. It's basically a slide deck where the students just introduce and share. So this could be like a first week activity for any teacher in this place. And in fact, maybe we can answer like one of these questions right now in the public chat. But what the students would do is they would create a Google slide. So you could share your food or favorite food or hobby. You could share your favorite quote. There's other questions here. What makes you happy? If you could do anything right now, what would you do? What makes you laugh? What makes you feel brave? How do you show people you care? What makes you feel thankful? Now, here's a student sample of what the students might create, but why don't all of us in the public chat just type in one of these? Thank you, Diane, by the way, for mentioning that book, 16 Years in 16 Seconds. Yes, it's a children's book. I think these children's books are wonderful to introduce in schools as well. All right, so Malia's, if she were to create her slide deck, she might include, she feels happy learning. Monica, exercising, yes. Behind me, you see Dana Point. I love hiking and mountain biking as well. Oh, Kyle dancing, awesome. Cooking for my family. Lisa, your family must be so blessed. Walking in nature, David, you and I were like same cloth. So you can see how this could be valuable. BTS, Kelly, BTS. We got to play some BTS music in the background for the next session. Request for Kelly. Or like lots of people these days. Tracy enjoys hiking. Yeah, out here in Orange County, Laguna, some great hiking trails. Vicky, I have not had a chance to go to Korea in a long time, but I've been wanting to go back again. Although my wife did have a chance to go this summer. Yeah. So can you imagine the students creating their own My Story page where they introduce themselves? First of all, they can introduce themselves to themselves, right? Because that metacognition is important, this thinking about your own thinking. Then you introduce yourself to your pair partner, you introduce yourself maybe to your team, if you're sitting in collaborative groups in your classroom. And then there might be some whole group share out as well. And this is a great way to just connect with your entire class, community build. But at the same time, it's not just community building, right? They're also learning how to create that Google slide. They're also learning how to collaborate. And I talked about the 5 C's. They're also learning how to communicate, collaborate, be creative, critical think, and have compassion for one another. Right in the first week with this activity, where they're sharing their My Story, And also you have this. If this is slide deck, so right now you're seeing this one right here from this student, but let's say everyone's slide deck is here back to back to back, then you have the whole class in one place. I don't know about you, but sometimes with the number of students that I have, I can sometimes forget the details about a student, right? So sometimes I can also go back here and remember, oh, this person liked that, or this is their hobby, in case I'm thinking, I want to really connect with this student because I'm feeling a little disconnected. And then I'll look at this and it'll remind me on how to connect. So that's the first activity of the know and tell your story. This my story assignment. Then now we go a little deeper. We first begin with what's comfortable to share, and then we kind of move to something a little bit deeper. This is a strategy called photo voice. And it comes out of UCI. It's photographic storytelling, basically, where you have a photo and then you're talking about your story. Oftentimes it connects to civic engagement and learning, but I found that it's also helpful and valuable to whether you're talking about ethnic foods or family photos or even migration stories. This approach can be used. Here are some sentence starters for the showed analysis. What I see in that picture is, what is happening is, this relates to our life because, this is happening because, this can educate others by, what we can do about this is, so you can imagine just like the My Story slide deck, which students create where they share their My Story, you can also see like a photo voice, and it could be on a variety of things. It could be their family, migration story, ethnic foods. I mean, you could do this activity so many times, right? And they're learning a lot of different skills as they do this. Here's my sample that I created for my students. And actually this could be used with staff as well, because sometimes when you're working with other educators, we don't know a lot about their story either. So I use this strategy to also connect with staff or their college students as well. So I'm going to go ahead and read this. And I was inspired, by the way, to go to the Korean Bell of Friendship after listening to President Sung's seminar 2 years ago. I heard about the Korean Bell of Friendship and I was like, I never heard of this place before. And so then I told myself, you know what, I'm going to go there. I'm going to go to San Pedro and I'm going to take my mom there and I'm going to thank her for her story of resilience, for her migration story. But anyways, here's the showed analysis. What I see is a picture of my mother with 2 of my daughters in front of the Bell of Friendship in San Pedro, California. Actually, I have 5 daughters, but these are my youngest 2, the ones that joined me on this trip. What is happening is we are visiting the Bell of Friendship, a gift given by the Republic of Korea to the United States in 1976 on the bicentennial of US independence as a gesture of friendship between the United States and the Republic of Korea. This relates to my life because I'm reminded how little I've learned about my Korean American story, and that has made it harder for me to know my own story of generational resilience. I just learned about this place at a workshop I attended in the summer of 2021. It was President Sung's workshop 2 years ago. This is happening because I came here wanting to thank my mother for her migration story to the United States and her resilience in coming to a new country and her courage to make a home. I bet there's a lot of Korean Americans and Asian Americans and many folks who have not thanked their parents for their migration story. I bet. Thank you. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for facing the discrimination. Thank you for overcoming the language. You are great. You have a great story of resilience. I don't think my mom completely understood my heart and desire when I was sharing, but I think she appreciated it nonetheless. This can educate others by understanding that many people have a migration story and to see it as a story of resilience. What we can do about it, give others the opportunity to discover and share their migration and generational story with empathy and respect. Okay, and Vicky's saying, oh, really resonates with you. Thank you for that feedback. Yeah, I think this is important for the student to reflect on their own thinking. Sometimes we're thinking, oh yeah, the student is thinking about what they're thinking about when they're feeling about, but we know that youth, especially between middle and high school, their prefrontal cortex, right? It's being shaped and developed. Lots of hormones, it's being developed. So that cognitive thinking isn't always 100. Sometimes when you ask, why did you do that? What are you thinking? They can honestly say, I don't know, because it wasn't necessarily their cognitive function that was really doing that. So giving them space to kind of think about their own thinking is so important, especially for adolescents. So you can imagine using, and I hope you're writing this down. You're writing like, oh, I could use my story here. Oh, I could use the photo voice here for this with my students or my fellow colleagues or my department teams so that I can connect with them and know their story, right? And then I think Carol talked a little bit about oral histories. I actually did an oral history with my mother as well. I'm only gonna play maybe 1 minute of this just so you can get a feel for it. The questions that I was able to pull were from the Smithsonian. So the Smithsonian has some good guidelines for oral history. So this is, I'm just gonna play just 1 minute of this so you can just get a feel for it.
Hello, this is Dr. Jeff Kim with Ed Family, and tonight I'm here with my mom actually, and I will be taking my mom's oral history of her experience in Korea. So let's go ahead and begin at first. What is your name?
내 이름은 김승애입니다.
So my mom's saying her name is Kim Seung-ae. In Korea, the last name Kim is spoken first, and Seung-ae is her first name. Do I have your permission to record this interview?
네.
Yes, so she's saying yes, I do have her permission to record this interview.
별로 안 좋아하지만 아들이 자꾸 하려니까.
So actually, this is not my first time trying to get this interview. I've asked multiple times, and so she's saying, not really, but because I've been asking, and that it's because something that I want, she is permitting this interview. So
it's just like what Carol Park said. She'd been asking, but wasn't getting it right away. But I think I understand a little bit why that might be the case. You know, oftentimes, and yeah, you know, if you don't like, how many of you have something like this recorded of your own parents or your parents' parents? You know, sadly, my father, he went home to be with the Lord maybe about 18 years ago. So if I wanted to record more of his stories, I'm glad I have some recordings, right? But if I want to record more stories, we know that those stories are almost and potentially lost forever. So having these stories recorded would benefit anyone in this group, many of you in this group. Wouldn't you want to have something like that? Wouldn't you want to have something like that for your children, your grandchildren, that they could have something like this? And I'm sure your students in the class would want the same as well. So giving that space and opportunity is so powerful, and also create that parent connection at the school site with these oral histories. But yeah, one reason it might be difficult for some families is because of the triple trauma, right? Especially of my mother's generation. Her grandparents, a survivor of being colonized as a nation. The colonization of Korea was brutal between 1910 to 1945. We've also learned about the Korean War between 1950 to 1953. Both of my parents are survivors of the Korean War, a difficult time where 10% of Korea lost their lives. And once again, Korea was one nation for many years, but many thousands of years. But it's this North and South Korea is a relatively new thing. And I didn't realize until I started talking to my mom about these kinds of things that, oh, your location was actually above the border in the north area. That surprised me. You survived that journey, that migration south. Wow, what a story of resilience. But maybe a lot of families, they don't see their migration story as a story of resilience. But when I think about it, I think, wow, my mom, she's a survivor. My grandmother is a great survivor. When she was traveling from North Korea to South Korea before the war, before the division, like my mom was sick, just a baby, and my grandmother was like ripping her handbook to make like diapers for my mother who was sick. They both survived traveling down south. You know what? Maybe that gives me some resilience too. And maybe that's resilience that I'm going to also pass down as well to my children. So what if I didn't know that story? Is it a story of resilience if I don't know that story? No, it's not a story of resilience then. It's maybe even a source of shame. Like, oh, I don't know anything about my culture. I don't know anything about my history. I don't know anything about Korean Americans. I don't know anything about my family. Sadly, that I think it's like that for many young people. So that's the first part of the no. And then the third part is the ethnography. And so just like I showed you those slides, you don't have to use these questions. These are just some questions that I could ask that the students would put together. What does your name mean? Like they would include their My Story slide, then what does your name mean? Share your family tree or friend tree, people who made a difference in your life, doesn't have to be biological. What are some similarities between your parents' generation, your children's generation? Then they could also put in that photo voice slide. They could also put in the oral history slide. Now they're getting this whole ethnography, like this history book of themselves, right? And then I think this is also good for college too. College applications are asking this. Yeah, tell me your story. If you haven't had a chance to think about it, it's hard to tell the story. Yeah, so how is being bicultural or multicultural a strength for you in your future? How do you plan to contribute to make America a better place? How do you define your cultural identity? How does your individual cultural identity shape you? So here's one from one of my students. His name is Cade. His middle name is Hidemi. He's Japanese American. And this is what he said. He said, my middle name speaks volumes and it carries a lot of meaning, you see. Hidemi was my grandma's brother who actually passed away when he was 3. He sadly died of cancer, and it was during the time when my grandma and her family were in Japanese internment camps. My grandma still tells me stories, and I admit it scares me every time, yet I listen and I carry the name on as it shows the struggles of my family has gone through and represents our perseverance and strength. So, you know, when I used to think about the Japanese internment, the Japanese American internment, I used to think adults for some reason. But, you know, there were children there. There were children born there. There were children that were 3 years old. There were children with cancer in those Japanese internment camps, including Cade's uncle. So yeah, this is a powerful story of resilience. And this is what Cade had to say. I'm not ashamed of my past, for I know who I am. But if you don't know your story, then sometimes it's a source of shame. And for, once again, many youth, it is a source of shame. And you don't have to be Korean American to look at your own story. This actually was from one of my students who was white here, and he could trace his migration story all the way back to the Mayflower. And he said this, of the 102 passengers that made the 2-month voyage to Plymouth, only 53 survived the first winter. One of them being my ancestor, William Bradford, who founded the Plymouth colony. Isn't that a story of resilience too? Isn't that a great story of resilience? And also a reminder that even this student has a migration story. Yeah, there was a time when his ancestors migrated to the United States as well. There's a lot of folks who goes, no, I'm American, I've always been American. No, unless you're Native American, you have a migration story, but a lot of people don't know their migration story. I'm glad this student did, because it's a story of resilience. Here's another one of a student who shared, when my parents first moved to America, they didn't speak English, which was one major obstacle. My dad told me how he faced racism as a child. I bet if this student wasn't assigned this project, she would have never asked her father about this question and would never have heard that her father faced racism as a child. Maybe he wouldn't have talked about it with her, because those aren't fun experiences to talk about it. But sometimes knowing that, oh, my parents experienced this too, my parents overcame this, it gives a sense of resilience. Here's an example of a student created photo voice. It's of the children at the border. And once again, it's not about my personal political opinion. It's about giving students a space to talk about what matters to them. Here's another slide that another student gave. For example, something easily known is that I used to get bullied for food. I brought it to school. I used to bring miyeokguk, which is seaweed soup, and get made fun of it. But I didn't understand why, because it was so good, and used to cry and complain to my mom why I couldn't just have a sandwich or something like the others. It may seem small, I was a little kid, but I was ashamed of something that was from my origin. And I learned not to be, which again, I think is cultural pluralism, multiculturalism, to be, not be ashamed to have a culture. I think so many young people ashamed. How about this one? One of the things my home culture brings into America is K-pop. Not exactly value, but it brought respect and got noticed for this. I remember when I was younger, this girl asked where I was from, and I answered South Korea. And she laughed and said, so you don't come from nowhere. And she really didn't know where it was. But then 6 years later, she became a fan of K-pop and claimed she loved Korea. So we live in one of the most culturally blessed nations in the world, right? So how can we be culturally honoring? So we are already culturally blessed, but it's only a blessing if we know and understand and have heard the stories of one another. And I think that has to do with our Constitution too. In order to form a more perfect union, as wonderful as we are, we want to make a more perfect union. I think even our founding fathers realized that when he said, in order to form a more perfect union. A part of that includes knowing their own story, their own migration story. So that's part one. So I think all of us can integrate aspects of part one into any class that we teach, right? Now I'm going to move on to part two of this course, which is getting the historical big picture of Korean Americans history. And it's looking at Ed Chang's and Carol Park's book, Korean Americans: A Concise History. I'm just going to go ahead and read the chapter titles because I think you'll find it to be beneficial. This book is about 100 pages, a very easy read. It's one of the, I've never seen it just in 100 pages, Korean American history like this. I highly recommend it. Chapter one is looking at the early Korean Americans and Hawaiian sugar plantations and indigenous people, like the 1903, the first wave. Chapter two is looking at Pachapa Camp and noteworthy Korean American incidents. That's what Dr. Ed Chang was talking about. Chapter three was the Korean independence movement in Korea and how it was shaped by Korean Americans and other Koreans outside of Korea. Chapter four looks at World War II, Korean American heroes and the Korean War. Chapter five looks at Korean American community post 1965 Immigration Act. That's the third wave of Korean Americans. Chapter six looks at Black Korean race relations in the 1980s and the 1992 LA riots. Carol Park mentioned a little bit. And chapter seven, modern Korean Americans and the road ahead. So when I teach this course, I'm going to have my students, I think I have one of two options. One is a jigsaw. They're going to take charge of one of these chapters and then create their own presentation to share with the other students in the class. And or each group will create kind of a children's story where they're going to pretend they're creating a book for children. All right, and so now that's part two of the course. Part three of the course, we'll be looking at Korean American stories of resilience. It could include the Dosan Anchang-ho lesson, or the Dr. Sammy Lee's lesson, or the letter to President Wilson, the Korean independence movement lesson, or the Colonel Young-ho Kim bio poem lesson, or the Korean transnational adoption stories lesson, or the 1992 LA civil unrest lesson, coming from the Korean American Model Ethnic Studies curriculum. Once again, in this course, we're going to be probably going over a lot of it, and there's probably many that we haven't touched base on, but we're going to go through a lot of them. But if you wanted a student-friendly version of some of those lessons, or a teacher-friendly version where the lessons are ready to go, I highly recommend this website here from the Korean American Studies Education Foundation. I also shared it with Ginny. And they give detailed lesson plans on all the ones that I just mentioned, including the PowerPoints and YouTubes, so that if you wanted to implement even one of these lessons, it wouldn't be difficult to do that. And so once again, it's beginning with your curiosity. Which, out of all the stories you heard, which one do you want to talk about, in your own class? So we got the ethnography, you got the book, then we got all these lessons. Which one do you want to explore more? Now, the course that I'll be teaching is going to happen virtually. So we'll be meeting one day virtually and then asynchronously the other days. It will meet the ethnic studies requirement and G of the A through G requirements for the university. And I'm hoping that this course is also going to help for college admissions, because students who take this course, they can say on their college application, this is the first Korean American Studies course, high school level, in the United States. So in essence, they're kind of making history, but it's also an opportunity to grow in their passion, their purpose, their interest, their civic action as well. So doing something with what they care about. This course has gotten a lot of support from various organizations, including ICANN, but also UCI, UCLA, Cal State Fullerton, USA NBC News, and so forth. So what is part 4 of this course? So we talked about part 1, part 2, part 3. Part 4 of this course is going to be the students creating a virtual Korean American Studies museum, because it's not going to be me conveying all this information to them, but they are going to be the leaders. They are going to be the docents of this museum. In fact, after they leave this course, I'm sure they'll be in the top 1% of individuals that know about Korean American history. And so they're going to be the docents of this course. They're going to create a virtual museum on a variety of things. Maybe they're going to be sharing their parents' oral history. Maybe they're going to be sharing the stories of resilience of these Korean Americans, and that will all be a part of this virtual museum. And then part 5 will be a component of civic action and also a connection to college and career connection. So after they know their story, after they've heard these stories of resilience, then what are they going to do with it? So remember how we talked about know, tell your story, listen to one another's stories with empathy and respect, and then do something good with their story. So we may put on events like soapbox speeches on issues that matter to them. We might do a day of dialogue where we gather in students, teachers, and parents to talk about issues that matter to the community, whether it's student-led. I'll tell you this, the students requested a day of dialogue in 2020 when we saw that surge in anti-Asian racism. Some students were feeling emotionally very upset. They're asking their teachers, what can we do about this? And so we had a day of dialogue. We had some productive discussions around it. We might give them some opportunity for some civic action projects or opportunities to also learn about Korean American leaders or AAPI organizations, and giving them a chance to actually do something with it, get that civic engagement. In California, we also have the seal of civic engagement. So once again, this is helping them develop a critical skill, but it's also good for college too. And I don't think college is the end, but for many in the Korean American community, that's very important to them. So I want to be mindful of that and support them with their college admissions process as well, because it's important to them. So yeah, so capturing the Korean American Studies course. Those are the 5 pieces of that course. But once again, if you leave with anything, know, tell, listen, and do. And I'll go ahead and open it up at this time for any questions. I think I have a couple of minutes for that. So yes, I see Vicky. Vicky also, by the way, Anaheim Elementary is doing some great work with Korean American stories as well, as in addition to Asian American stories. I don't know, Sung or Vicky, if you want to share out about what the curriculum specialists are doing to kind of help students in Anaheim. Once again, I don't think Anaheim has the most Korean Americans out of like our neighboring cities. We also have Garden Grove, Fullerton, Irvine. However, they have become the leaders, though, in so much because of great folks. Sung, Vicky, did you want to share out a little bit of what you guys did for AAPI month? I know I had a chance to meet with you and collaborate a little bit.
Morning, Dr. Jeff Kim. Thank you for this opportunity for me to tell everyone a little bit about what where Anaheim Elementary School District has been working on. So to celebrate Asian AAPI month, we started working on starting from Tucson and Changho, and based on the curriculum that you and other Korean scholars have been working on, we started from Tucson and Changho, and we just finished Semi Lee, Dr. Semi Lee's lesson. So basically, just creating this Korean ethnic studies curriculum especially for elementary school group level. So not just for our Korean dual language emergent students, for everyone in our district.
Sung, one thing I really appreciated about your curriculum was it's not just history, but it like talked about a value or was developing a kind of skill. Can you give an example of a question that would be asked for the students to be kind of the starter to get into the story and the history?
For me, what really resonates, first of all, story of Tucson and Changho, how I knew him as, Korean hero, as a Korean liberation activist, but just knowing his influence in America as a Korean American and connecting his story and his emphasis on honesty, and how he, for me personally, it really resonated with me that when he was asked from Japanese government, when he was in prison, to stop being a Korean liberation activist, he told everyone that he does not hate Japanese. He does not hate Japanese government. He does not want Japan to perish, but instead he wants them to be a good nation, and he wants Korea and Japan to have a good relationship. And that kind of mentality and belief really resonated. And then my colleague Laura Houston and I wanted that, that to be the emphasis. Sorry, I wish I can explain a little more better.
Oh, I put you on the spot, so thank you for just even explaining it briefly. It's just to remind us all, it's not just about one person,
Absolutely.
but a value that person represents. So students can all resonate with honesty or hard work or community and unity. And these are all things that our schools can have. So it creates a lot of discussion opportunities and opportunities for intersection then. It's not just about this Korean American that lived a long time ago, but it's about someone who's relevant today, someone that connects to folks like Martin Luther King or Sylvia Mendez, has a lot of intersectionality, so it can connect to many people's histories and to give us a deeper understanding. And I know I'm talking about this course that's grades 9 through 12, but Sung, you guys are doing this work in elementary. So it's a reminder that it doesn't have to be in high school, but even in elementary, there's so much opportunity for discussion and dialogue. And I thank you for your leadership in that area. And I think I see there, Vicky, when we create this book or the presentation, could we share? Yes, I'd be happy to share once again. That's the hope for this course, that the students will become the docents. So when they learn this information, my hope, because once again, if I would ask many folks, could you name even one Korean American? It'd be hard for many. They will be the ones to share it with their peers. They will be the ones to share, if they're high school students, they'll share it with middle school students. They could share it with their parents. They could share it with the elementary school students. We could have virtual workshops, all kinds of things. And also I do have a YouTube channel called Ed Family. And so on there, as I continue to work on this Korean American Studies course, I'll go ahead and I'll be sharing a little bit about more of these Korean American stories as well.